September 9th meeting of the Law Committee. Thank you for attending this meeting on short notice. Can anybody hear me with the door open?
A little.
A little? All right. We have one item on the agenda. Commissioner, would you like to, address the committee at all about this?
This basically is to approve funding for the acquisition of 350 electronic poll books and related peripheral items, as well as 18 on-demand ballot printers. This has been necessitated by the recently enacted legislation mandating early voting. As you're probably all aware, at this point we're going to have a 9-day period of early voting before the general election and before each election thereafter. That creates an opportunity for fraud, and the state legislature has recognized this, and it's been determined that early voting requires an effective monitoring system of electronic poll books, which permits us to determine who's voted and when they voted and whether they voted more than once. So we've made an assessment based upon our review of the products that are being offered. We've determined that our best bet is no wink for the electronic poll books, and we've decided that we would be using Verizon for cellular service. These poll books communicate with each other, and they need to have cellular service to enable them to get coverage throughout the entire county. So we've come up with a budget which is roughly about $583,000, and there's 2 grants that the state has provided for funding this. And it's going to total, in our case, about $447,000 of the $583,000. There's 2 different aspects to this thing before you tonight. The first is an application for approval of the grant and the contract that would ensue for the capital grant. That's $255,000. And then there's a related aid to localities grant of $191,444. Totals $447,000. But it's essential that we get this immediately. I know that it's a very short time frame here. This came down on us very quickly. We had to review all of the products, and we had to make determinations, negotiate quotes from the vendors, etc. And the early voting will commence next month on October 26th. And between now and then, we have to not only acquire the product, we have to train all of the poll inspectors on its use. So we're urging that this body, the Law Committee, approve the items for enactment authorization by the legislature.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
Matt, you mentioned 2 different items. I see the $255,000.
Yes, there's another grant. We don't have a state contract yet. They have not prepared one, but we do have our pro rata share of the monies that have been allocated, and it's $191,444.
Up until Friday, this was in dispute because originally the governor's office agreed with the state legislature to dedicate this level of funding towards early voting and the funding of any sort of materials that have to come with it, and they rescinded that on that figure. So it went back into negotiation, and then they reinstated the money. So these grants, though, are a reimbursement. So it's not money that you receive up front. So the county would essentially have to bankroll the operation and then seek reimbursement through these grants. But correct, the grant money is not yet available on the aid to municipalities. In addition to that, it is important to note that we did do a pilot program with Knowing on the use of electronic poll books in a special election in Cohoes that we recently had, and it was very successful. So it is something that we have tested And we do know that it is something that will work for us.
Will you be returning for the second half of that? The aid to localities piece?
Yeah, we will be
Yes.
coming back at a later date to approve the
Yeah.
authorization for that.
We're not gonna miss out on any opportunities for additional funding from the state for this program, so.
Thank you.
Question for either of the commissioners. So is $583,000 your best guesstimate today
Yes,
Yeah.
for 2019?
yes,
2019 and 2020. We rolled in a year 2 fee for the cellular service and the year 2 fee for the software licensing for the pole pads. It will cover through December 31 of 2020 as far as we know.
Okay, so,
Yeah.
I mean, this is,
because we didn't want to shock everyone.
well,
So
no,
we did roll
I
it,
guess
yeah,
my
so we
question
did-
was,
right, so
when
we
we
rolled it
get,
in.
when we get to be making budget,
There
a
are
month or 2
additional
months
costs
from
here
now.
that you do have to anticipate, annual costs that are going to be, that are going to be there that have not previously existed. And so.
above this one.
Potentially, yeah, because there's always an evolving system. Just so you understand how quickly this is evolving and how erratic it is, there are still election reform bills that have not yet been signed by the governor, and there are still that are anticipated. So they may even now there's discussion about moving the presidential primary up, along with consolidating it with state and local primaries to entirely different parts of the year. So this is an ever-evolving system that is not something you can prepare or anticipate for to some degree, but we are doing our best to kind of assess the situation and take it from there. So rather than shock you in year number 2, we rolled in some of those additional costs into this. You understand where the figures are coming from.
So, but the hardware that you're suggesting today
Is today.
would be sufficient
Yes.
for the entire county?
For the foreseeable
Yeah.
future.
Well, just so you understand how crazy this is, so they didn't adjust state election law to allow us to consolidate polling places for the general election. They only did it for early voting. So one would have assumed logically that they would allow us, with the use of electronic poll books, to consolidate election districts, right? So that a voter could walk into a polling place, and if there's 7 election districts in it, they can go to any table. That's not the case. They have not adjusted election law to do that. So here we are in a bind where we're forced to purchase 1 electronic poll book per election district and keep it solely that way so that only that voter list is available at that table, rather than be able to just make it so that they can go to any table. Whereas with early voting, it's a little bit different. So this is something that they didn't put a ton of thought into, and they just kind of wanted to get it done. And so now there are consequences to enacting legislation that way.
So,
We're gonna open the other.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Cunningham.
so the iPads are what people are going to use to vote?
Yes, so it's essentially like going to the grocery store and checking out and just signing using a stylus pen. And there was a lot of apprehension and fear that went into it, but when we rolled it out for our special election, people loved it. Like the average transaction was about 27 seconds, and so eliminates the need to have to flip through a book of 100 pages and try to find a name. Yeah, there are major advantages to the system. I like it, but Matt, a little bit old school.
The one feature that I think is good is it permits the Board of Elections to monitor the activity at every polling site simultaneously.
Yeah.
So we know if there's a problem with any of these poll pads, and we can communicate directly to the inspectors via the poll pads. It's got a lot of really good features. One of them is the reporting. You can get a report of who's voted.
So someone votes, the early voting ends on that Sunday,
Yes.
November 3rd.
Correct.
So if someone votes using the iPad, it references in the write-up that there's some mechanism to ensure that that's synced with...
It does. It syncs every 2 minutes
Okay.
to it's called like a cloud. So it's a server that it constantly updates. It's a live feed. And so you can't technically go from one polling place to another one and then vote again.
So when I
And-
show up on the Tuesday, if I voted on Sunday,
It says voted and locks you out.
in
of
the
voting.
little book that,
On the pad itself. There's no book anymore.
there's no book anymore?
No more
Okay.
book. It's just a pad.
It's not where you vote.
So are we saying that we're not in?
No more book.
No more book. But on election day, do you sign in the book? Somebody still gives you a sheet of paper that you fill out and you go through a machine?
Correct.
You sign the electronic poll book,
It's a
Right.
poll pad.
Okay.
and then
Yeah.
you'll get a ballot that corresponds with your election district.
And what happens if somebody comes in and they're not in the poll book? Handled the same way?
The same way
With
you
an
used to handle
emergency
it.
ballot?
Yeah,
or-
An affidavit ballot,
An
yeah.
affidavit ballot?
Yep. And so that's what, and it's a pretty cool system. As opposed to having to play a guessing game, it walks the inspector through the process. So right now, when you pull up someone who should vote affidavit, you can press something that says affidavit ballot and it walks them through the process. People who need assistance, it reads, you can actually press a button, it will read the oath to them for requiring for assistance or even a challenge to a voter. So it does things that they had to manually do before. It eliminates all that work for them.
What is the backup system should that tablet go down for any reason?
We have miniature paper poll books.
You mean at the poll site?
At the poll site?
Yeah.
If the machine just,
We're still required by law to send a backup paper, but it's like, yeah, it's not, it doesn't look the way it used to.
they don't have a backup? book?
Shorter version, but there's going to be a paper backup at every district.
Okay.
But we did purchase additional poll pads, so we're not just relying on, hoping for the best. But just so you understand the difference, for early voting, we're using ballot on demand printing system. On election day, the ballots will physically be at the table. So we still have to print all those ballots. For early voting, it's a ballot on demand printing system, which means it sends the ballot style for that voter, communicates to a printer, and the printer then prints the ballot on the spot. So it takes a guessing game out of a ballot style. So sometimes you see some confusion in primaries. A conservative voter will come in and receive an Independence Party ballot inadvertently or whatever it is. It eliminates human error in that respect.
Wanted to save you on printing costs too for your
Well,
private-
only for early voting,
Early
but not
voting.
for election day, so,
Okay, thank you.
yeah.
Yes, thank you. Somebody comes in and votes early. They come to the polling place on election day, November 5th. It indicates that they have voted. There's no way to change their vote because they may have heard something over the past several days of the candidate.
No,
Once you voted, you voted.
Once you
Once you
voted,
you
voted.
can only
Yeah.
vote once.
not like the absentees were in the past.
No.
Well,
This-
with absentees, if you voted absentee, you're still allowed to go to the polling place on election day and vote on machine. We then rescind the absentee, but that's the only extenuating circumstance.
This is just as if you went to the polling, it's going to the polling site and voting in person.
Gotcha.
Yes.
So, I have two questions. One is, like, there's a deadline date for people, one being able to, be registered. And is the deadline date still set for poll book?
Well, it's a very good question. It's a very gray area, because there's no definitive date set for the cutoff, right, for including voters in the poll book. But generally speaking, there would be no reason to not include them if they registered in time with this new system. So we have just included anyone who has registered in sufficient time. In other words, prior to the election.
Yeah, it's still, right now, it's still governed by the statutory 25-day limit. The legislature enacted the first step towards a constitutional amendment, which, if it's passed by the next succeeding legislature, and then it goes to a public statewide referendum and passes that, the state constitution will be changed to permit the legislature to enact on-demand, or same-day registration. You can go to the poll site, register there, and vote.
Right, but that would be on election day itself. That's a different concept. But yeah, we have to now transfer information manually. There's nothing in place to allow us to just hit a button on a computer. So we have to transfer all registration from other counties now without them having to re-register. And you can't do a party change anymore from one county to another. You know how the exception to it was you used to have to wait the full election cycle? Now, it's an automatic transfer of that person's registration for whatever party they were registered at previously at another county.
So the affidavit ballot, it is still part of the
Yes,
process?
yes.
Okay, so people are just voting from an iPad?
Yep.
No machine anymore?
Oh, no,
No, there's no
really
machine.
signing in.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
signing in.
Right, so forget,
Still gonna
just
be a
pretend
ballot,
there's
right,
no
you're still
book,
gonna get a
instead of a
ballot.
book, there's an
Instead of signing the
iPad.
book, you're gonna sign an iPad.
You know, we'll be happy to actually hold a demonstration in our office using this new system so that you can all become acquainted with it and, you know, see sort of how it works, and I think you find it interesting.
So the issue with the people, let's do something else then. When the ballot itself, okay, there's an error in the ballot. They're only writing in. They're only registering their name. Never mind.
Okay.
Never mind.
I can tell you from experience, because of the special election goes, it worked very well. Asking the people who did it, they had no problem with it, no complaints, and even for myself to see it done, who's not savvy technology,
Sign-in book.
this works out well. There was no complaints from older people, anybody. It's a good way of doing it.
So it sounds like the iPad replaces the book, and you still have a paper ballot that goes into the machine. So,
Correct.
okay.
As you know, we have some, not just Verizon, but cellular connectivity issues,
Serious ones.
serious ones, especially in the town of Colony. And I know there are other places, but, so the early polling sites, have you tested the Verizon
Yeah,
signal there?
absolutely. We're in the process of physically going to every single site and testing the connectivity and trying to figure out whether we have to use cellular or Wi-Fi. So in some areas, cellular data is much better, and in some areas, we have to use Wi-Fi instead. And we are working closely with the Verizon rep to figure out a way to make it happen. So it's part of this implementation.
So for
We do
the
speed
six,
tests and
so
everything
for
else.
the 40 or 38 sites in Colony, each one of them is gonna be looked at individually to see
Yep.
how
We already started it.
your books are going to be able to
Yeah.
communicate.
And we've been working with John Wimple's team to do that as well. So they're coming along with our staff and testing, conducting speed tests at every site. And it is problematic in Loudonville, by the way, so.
I know.
Any further questions?
I was gonna make a motion to move it.
I'll second it.
Thank you. All moving with recommendation?
Yes.
Yes, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'm not opposed, but may I just make one quick comment? So League of Women Voters last night held a session about the early voting and the election changes. And there were some gaps in our knowledge and understanding. We've been trying to work with the Board of Elections, but we do plan on holding another session and would really love to have the Board of Elections there. There was many people who asked us, could there be someone from the Board of Elections here, so.
Yeah, yeah. We generally do take part in many community events, as long as we can. We are unfortunately swamped. It's very difficult for us to come up for air these days, so, but we will definitely try to work with you to make that happen.
Thank you. Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you. The measure passes unanimously. Thank you for all your time on these
Yeah.
issues.
Thank
Very
you.
extensive work.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, everybody.